Ohio State silences the doubters in a big win in Happy Valley.
You are Locked On College Football, smothered and covered, with your host, Barrett Sallee. Your one-stop shop for everything college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
It's been a stellar season in the world of college football. The fourth matchup between top five teams, and it did not disappoint. Ohio State survives Penn State, kind of an ugly game in Happy Valley, but the Buckeyes keep their Big Ten hopes alive. Today's show brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a great deal. New customers can get a $5 bet and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if that $5 bet is successful. That's right. One $5 bet. If you get it right, you get $150 only at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Hey, thank you for making this your first listen. We will, of course, have a lot to say about the whole day in college football, but the game of the day was Ohio State, Penn State. Penn State had this game, had all the momentum after that pick six, and then Chip Kelly went to work. A fantastic performance by the offensive coordinator of the Ohio State Buckeyes. Yes, Will Howard was great. Yes, they ran the dang ball. But when all is said and done, it's just methodical, moving down the field, getting Penn State going side to side, using that aggressiveness against them. This is what Chip Kelly was there to do. This is why he came from UCLA as a head coach to work for his former assistant at Ohio State. And it was only symbolic that to ice the game away, Will Howard gets the first down on an option, slides down at the right time this time, and gets a win over the team he grew up rooting for, and holds a little bit of animosity towards with James Franklin, who didn't recruit him. So what does this mean for Ohio State? It means they're in the Big Ten race. Make no mistake, a loss to Penn State would have knocked Ohio State out of the Big Ten race. Not officially, but think of all of the things that would have to happen in order for Ohio State to get back in. Indiana would have to lose. Now, Ohio State can take care of one of those losses if it wants to at the end of the season, but there's nothing to show you right now that Indiana is going to lose to anybody else. And then Penn State would have a 2-game advantage and a head-to-head. Ohio State or Oregon would have had a 2-game advantage and a head-to-head. So too much traffic if Ohio State lost that game, but it didn't. And now the Big Ten race is a big jumbled mess that over the next month is going to be fascinating to watch evolve. Absolutely fascinating. But Chip Kelly was the MVP. However, the offensive line for Ohio State deserves not even a golf clap. I would stand up, but you would not see my face. You would see just this fantastic Alpha Prime shirt. They deserve a standing ovation. That offensive line got absolutely abused by Nebraska last week. Now, 6 tackles for loss Penn State had, so it wasn't pretty all the time, but it was enough. It was enough for Chip Kelly to get in second and longs or second and shorts and third and shorts. They converted 6 of 12 in terms of third downs. Judkins had 95. You gave Will Howard a chance to make plays on the ground. You distributed carries all over the place. And like I said, Chip Kelly used that rushing attack to perfection. Abdul got running side to side. The speed of Penn State was used against it. Misdirection all over the place. And the fact that you had 3 players with 10 or more carries shows you just how great Chip Kelly was working this game. You can look at the stat sheet and say, okay, 358 wasn't that big of an offensive performance and whatever. Yes, it was. You go into Penn State, you want to be as smart as possible. Giving Will Howard that throw on the first drive, and I think that was trying to make a little too much of a statement. And Chip Kelly could have gotten all up in his feels. Chip Kelly could have tried to show that he's the smartest person in the room. Chip Kelly has done that quite a bit during his career, but he didn't. He settled down. That big game experience that Ohio State had in Eugene came into play. No panic, reset, and just get the job done. It was a phenomenal performance from the Ohio State Buckeyes. And like I said, now back in the Big Ten championship race. James Franklin. Big game James. Well, actually, it's not so big game James. Now 4-17 in his career at Penn State against Ohio State and Michigan. Now 1-10 against Ohio State while he's at Penn State. What's worse, though, is that this felt different. It felt to me like, okay, Ohio State, offensive line issues, maybe not as dynamic of a quarterback as they've had in the past, struggling running the football just a little bit, going into Happy Valley, a Penn State team that, yeah, they have some quarterback issues in terms of Drew Aller's health, but it didn't seem to matter. The rushing attack was on point, has been on point. The defense has been lights out. Abu Carter all over the place. This was it. This was the time for James Franklin to prove that he's actually a big game coach, that he can actually not just make this new 12-team college football playoff, but actually win it. And he failed. He failed developing an offensive game plan that would have been successful. He failed with clock management multiple times. James Franklin is not a big game coach. He showed it over and over and over again, and we saw it on Saturday. Now, I will say this. The 12-team playoff is perfect for a guy like James Franklin and perfect for a team like Penn State because they're probably going to make it. And Penn State's always one of those teams on the outside looking in, but barely on the outside looking in terms of the 14 playoff format. Now they'll probably get in, and then big game James will come out again and prove he's not so big game James. Does that mean that Penn State needs to make a change? The answer is no. You still have it pretty good. Right now, James Franklin is Mark Richt at Georgia. Close enough to get there. Always on the fringe. Has won conference championships in the past. Needed some special circumstances to get to a point where you can win conference championships. But never elite. Never a team that's at the pinnacle of the sport. Never a team that goes out there and knows it can whip your ass every single game. It's always punching above its weight. And sometimes it runs into a heavyweight who throws a haymaker and knocks him back on his ass. That's exactly what happened. Exactly what happened in this game. I don't fault Drew Aller. I don't fault Bo Pribula. I fault the coaching. Why didn't Tyler Warren have a catch in the first half? I get it. Caleb Downs was all over him, but we've seen Warren make circus catch after circus catch after circus catch. You have to let him cook. You have to at least get him in the game plan. He was barely targeted. It was mind-boggling. And Andy Koltanecki is a really good offensive coordinator. We saw that in week one, and it's continued all season long. That was a 180-degree turn from what we thought we knew about this offensive staff and Koltanecki as a play caller. There weren't many attempts at all to stretch the field. Like Penn State, that was the missing piece last year. You fixed it, and then you reverted back to what you used to be. Now, I know close game, big game. You don't want to make mistakes, but that's That's always what Penn State does. That's the reason they fail in these situations, and you reverted right back to it. What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and over again. And once again, in a big game, Penn State doesn't try to throw the ball downfield. The big play was non-existent. At some point, you got to take risks against these great teams. James Franklin decided not to, and what do you know? Not so big game James came out again, and Penn State lost a big game. It's like clockwork, man. Over and over and over again. It was really cool to see Will Howard sort of close the book on that game in very poetic fashion. I've not been the biggest Will Howard guy. I think everybody who's watched this show or listens to this show knows that. I became even less of a Will Howard guy when he slid with 0 seconds left trying to set up the potential game winner against Oregon. But how poetic is this that on the final drive, he runs for the first down and slides down to win a big game. I'm starting to get convinced that Will Howard can be a national championship quarterback. I really am. Now, is he going to be Dylan Gabriel in terms of stats? No, of course not. Is he going to be a stat monster at all? Like, you look at what he's done, it's not that sexy, but it gets the job done. And in a year like this, where a lot of these college football playoff contenders have quarterbacks who are very streaky, who are not very dependable, whose highs are very high, whose lows are very low, maybe you just want steady Eddie. And that's exactly what Will Howard has become. So I was wrong about it. I was wrong about him. I was wrong about this Ohio State offense. And for him to do that and not have deer in headlights syndrome after what happened last week with his offensive line, and to do it on the road in the 4th largest stadium on the planet. Will Howard, you got my vote, man. I am on board. Not doubting you ever again. You are the man. Hey, you know what? You, the fan, you need to pick me up, right? Our friends over at 5 Hour Energy know that being a passionate football fan, it's not just a hobby, it's a way of life. It takes a lot of energy to power through all day. Tailgates, touchdown celebrations, or an agonizing second overtime, which is why they've created the Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot with a special flavor called Fan Fuel, the energy shot made just for super fans like you. The fans who are in the parking lot and those who are last to leave, they see you. I needed a 5 Hour Energy this morning. Had a campfire last night, or a fire outside in the fire pit. Didn't get a whole lot of sleep. Had a 5 Hour Energy. Bam. Ready to go for a college football Saturday. Ready to go to bring you the best coverage on college football, smothered and covered. 5 Hour Energy knows that no matter what team you root for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. Whether you're prepping for a big tailgate or ironing your jersey, your game day to-do list is always a mile long. That's why the limited edition Fan the Stand 5 Hour Energy Shot is here to help you stay fueled throughout the season. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with a 5 Hour Energy. Available at 5hourenergy.com, shipped nationwide. All right, let's talk about those Georgia Bulldogs. Look, a 2-touchdown win over Florida looks great on paper. This was about as ugly as you can possibly get. The world's largest outdoor cocktail party got very, very sloppy. Why? Because the same old Georgia showed up, and that is not a good thing. It's a flawed football team. It is not a championship caliber football team. Yes, of course, good enough to make the college football playoff based on how the landscape of the season has gone, but they didn't run all that well. Nate Frazier finally showed up, but that's about it. Trevor Etienne got hurt. I get that, but this is a subpar rushing attack. And then Carson Beck, still the pick machine. 11 interceptions in 5 games. This is a regression that is about as surprising as a regression as we've seen in a very long time. He was the Heisman Trophy favorite at times during the offseason. Him and Quinn Ewers kind of went back and forth. There were calls for him to be benched in this game. That's how bad it was. Now, with this Georgia team moving forward, at Ole Miss versus Tennessee, those are the next two games. Now, to Georgia's credit, it has gone into a hostile spot in Texas and won, but it won with this defensive front seven. You still had the same problems offensively that you've seen all season. Georgia's on thin ice. Now, figuring out how to navigate through that thin ice is something that Georgia's done a very, very, very good job at this season. But Georgia, like, you can't sit here and think that this is a championship caliber team based on what we've seen. It's not. It's not. Ohio State proved it, that they're championship caliber. Oregon keeps on doing what Oregon continuously does. Miami, the same thing. Georgia, it seems like it's stuck in a rut offensively, and it doesn't look like it's capable of getting. I don't know what happened with Carson Beck. It's like him and Peyton Thorne suddenly switched jerseys. But this is not a championship caliber team, and if they're not careful, if Ole Miss forces them into a track meet next weekend in Oxford, which I'll be there to cover, things are going to get bad, folks. Things are going to get real bad. Elsewhere, the Big 12 is a hot mess. My colleague, Trey Wallace, wrote about this on Outkick, how don't look now. Colorado might make a run at the Big 12 championship. Iowa State goes down, a massive, massive, massive upset in terms of the overall landscape of the Big 12. Outside of BYU, who is it? It might be Colorado. The path is there. Probably not losing again. You might be looking at a 10-2 Colorado. And whether they make the Big 12 championship game or not, they actually might be in playoff contention. And so, like Trey said, the biggest beneficiary of this week in that conference is a team that didn't play. And that's Colorado. I love the Big 12. The final month of the season, I know we're sort of accustomed to talking about the SEC and the Big Ten for obvious reasons. But outside of BYU, there's not a national championship caliber team, and I'd argue that BYU isn't either. But the drama that's going to happen in that conference for the rest of the way out, and Colorado has found a way to put itself in position for the final month of the season. How many of you thought that was possible? Anybody? Bueller? Oh, nope, here they are. Offensive line playing much better, getting a little bit of help in the rushing game, and Travis Hunter doing Travis Hunter things. That is the recipe for success, and in a down Big 12, there you go. Now let's get to Oregon. We talked about Georgia being a team that's not complete. Oregon is. I think in this season, you've seen flawed teams all over the place. There's not one that has been perfect all year. I would say Texas was until the Georgia game. Now a little shaky. Obviously, they're off today, but the offensive line maybe not as good as we thought it was. The only one that is playing at an elite level is Oregon. They dominate Michigan in the Big House, and they've fixed the glitch to steal a line from Office Space. They are complete on the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. They weren't against Idaho. They weren't against Boise State. And here we are a month and 3 quarters later, and they are dominating. I know for us in the South, for those of us in SEC country, a lot of people find it hard to wrap their arms around the idea of Oregon being SEC ready, old school, because really they made their name in the college football world first with Mike Bellotti and then Chip Kelly and all the eye candy and all the other stuff. But Chip Kelly figured something out in the BCS championship game against Auburn. You got to win at the line of scrimmage. That started the progression of Oregon. Believe it or not, this is a 13, 14-year transition from that fancy old school or fancy new school football to what we see now, which is an absolutely dynamic offense, but one that is founded on running the football and winning the battle of the line of scrimmage. I tell you what, like, I don't care about voters. I don't want to be an AP top 25 voter. They ask me again, I say no, absolutely not. But if Oregon's not the unanimous number one top team in the country, I don't know why. I'd love to hear an explanation why. Because if you don't vote Oregon number one, you're a contrarian simply for being a contrarian. And it's not good for our business, and it's disrespectful to Oregon. We'll take a break. Don't forget, sign up for the subtext group below. It's in the description. You can text me all day, all night, all evening long. Sign up for subtext. It is worth your time. Today's show brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Get ready to tackle all the action this year in the NFL, because right now new customers can bet $5 and they'll get $150 in bonus bets if that $5 bet is successful. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Well, let's talk about the SEC in general. South Carolina with a dominant second half to beat Texas A&M, handing Texas A&M their first SEC loss. LSU and Texas sitting at home with one SEC loss. Tennessee getting the job done at Kentucky. Look, this is a giant mess. Not to mention all the teams with 2 conference losses. We already talked about Georgia. With a month to go in the season, with a little less than a month to go in the season, I really, really hope the SEC tiebreaker scenario has been examined by lawyers, because we might have to go deep, deep, deep. But for South Carolina, that field storming was incredible. The way that Shane Beamer took advantage of that situation, took advantage of the crowd, let Lenora Sellers cook, and found ways to get Rocket Sanders involved in a variety of different ways. A master class from a coach in Shane Beamer, who's been on this show, who I love, and is very, very disrespected. People thought he was going to be on the hot seat coming into the season. Do you believe now? Because not only has he gone on the road and whipped somebody's tail, he has knocked off a Texas A&M team that had all the momentum in the world. Now, I know Le'Veon Moss got hurt. That doesn't matter to me. The offense absolutely rolled a very good defense. It wasn't a secret what South Carolina was going to do. Didn't matter. And it just goes to show you how wild and crazy this sport can be and how deep the SEC is. And then you go up to Knoxville and you see what Tennessee, awful in the first quarter. They've got to get that fixed. But what do? You just hand it to Dylan Sampson. You let him cook. Single season rushing touchdown leader, broke the record today. Now, I'm a believer that a lot of coaches use mistakes and build off of them, right? Nick Saban was really good at that. Kirby Smart is so good at that. When you win with your C game, you actually love it because you have something to yell about for a week in practice. I'm not sure Josh Heupel really wants to deal with that anymore. I'm not sure what is going on with that offense, but for the third straight week, going to halftime with losing to whoever, right? We finally got a touchdown in the first half, but this is not something that can continue. I think this Tennessee team is sort of suffering through an identity crisis. They still want to make Nico Iamaleava a downfield passer, but I think it's clear right now he's not really ready for that. If he can't have success working off of Dylan Sampson and what he can do, then I'm not sure he can have success at the level that a lot of us, myself included, thought he could be. And yet, they still get the job done. They still get that win. The defense, as strong as it's been all year. And of course, we talked about Sampson. It's the wildest year in the SEC this year. It has made for great drama. Now, speaking of drama, there's not a lot of it in the ACC. Why? Because Miami got the job done against Duke. But I told you guys a long time ago about SMU. I told you guys before Rhett Lashley even came on this show in the spring that this SMU team was going to make noise in the ACC, that this SMU team was ready-made to make a run. Now, I thought it would be with Preston Stone and not Kevin Jennings in the spring, but we see where we are right now, an absolutely dominating performance over Pitt. And I think moving forward with this Mustangs team, you look at the schedule, there's nobody there. There's nobody there. Miami and SMU with unblemished ACC records, and SMU with the tiebreaker with a head-to-head over Pitt. Guys, I wouldn't be surprised at all. In fact, I expect Miami and SMU to be in the college football playoff this year. Yes, I truly believe that. Because if those two teams get to Charlotte, Miami and SMU as no loss, unblemished ACC teams. Yes, SMU has the out-of-conference. But if they get there, they're in, both of them. And how crazy would it be that the team that was sort of the afterthought in ACC expansion, the team that willingly gave up a ton of revenue just to get into a Power Four conference, represents that Power Four conference, not only as a participant in the conference championship game, but in the college football playoff. That's where SMU is right now. And yes, I truly believe that. You know, college football never disappoints. It never, ever, ever disappoints. It's the greatest sport on earth. Why? Because in another down weekend, right? One that's not necessarily being looked at as wildly intriguing. Sure, you have Penn State, Ohio State, but outside of that, nothing really jumps off the page. Well, things jumped off the page. Number 3, Penn State goes down. Number 10, Texas A&M goes down. Number 11, Iowa State. Number 11, Clemson. Yes, they were tied. Number 17, Kansas State. Number 18, Pitt. And number 24, Illinois. What a fantastic weekend. And why is that? It's because talent has been dispersed all over the country. You don't have dudes waiting 3 years to play. You've got dudes finding somewhere to play as a sophomore, as a redshirt freshman, when things don't work out at their first school. It's made this sport better. The transfer portal has made this sport better. It's made it more competitive. And every single week, whether we expect it or not, it's just chaos. All 4 television windows. You just have chaos happening all day long. It's why it's the greatest sport in the world. It's why it's the greatest sport in the world. We saw it again on Saturday. Last thing, Lincoln Riley, you're a fraud. We saw it again against Washington. Lincoln Riley, you're a fraud. No more analysis. You've heard that on this show since February. But I just felt like I had to say it. Lincoln Riley, still a fraud. That will wrap it up for this instant reaction recap of Week 10. Don't forget to check out Locked on College Football. Spencer McLaughlin does a great job. Locked on SEC, Locked on all of our conference shows. They do a great job getting you ready for the upcoming week and recapping what has gone on over Thursday through Saturday. So check those out as well. Until Monday, have a great Sunday, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.